Dr. Naomi Carter had endured her fair share of exhausting shifts, but nothing could have prepared her for the storm that was about to hit. She was used to being overworked and underestimated, the young black surgeon who always had to prove herself twice as hard just to be taken half as seriously. That night was no different. A backlog of paperwork, a last-minute addition to her surgical schedule, and a routine vasectomy on some bloke whose name she barely glanced at before scrubbing in. Quick procedure, no complications, done in under an hour. She was already halfway out of the theater when the tension in the hospital corridor hit her like a wall. People were whispering, phones buzzing, nurses shooting each other wide-eyed looks. Something was wrong. "Did you see who's here?" Someone muttered behind her. "No way. Him?" She barely paid attention until she caught a glimpse of a news notification on a nurse's phone. A headline in bold, glaring letters. "Cillian Murphy hospitalized. Fans in panic." Naomi felt a slow, creeping sense of dread crawl up her spine. No, 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 no. She turned sharply, grabbed the nearest clipboard and scanned the patient name she had not bothered to check earlier. Cillian Murphy. Her stomach plummeted. With shaking hands, she sprinted to the recovery ward, shoving past startled nurses, her heart pounding louder than her footsteps. When she skidded to a stop beside the bed, she nearly lost all feeling in her legs. There, lying peacefully unconscious, was Cillian Murphy. Beloved actor, international star, the man who definitely had not planned to have a vasectomy that night. The murmurs around her grew louder. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "Does she realize what she's done?" The door slammed open and Dr. Whitmore, her boss, stormed in like a thundercloud about to unleash hell. His face was the color of an aneurysm. "Carter," he bellowed, "tell me this is a joke." Naomi opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Whitmore ran a hand down his face, exhaling like a man whose entire career was flashing before his eyes. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" A nurse, still glued to her phone, gasped. "Sir, the press already knows. Twitter's—" "I don't give a damn about Twitter," Whitmore exploded, then turned back to Naomi with a glare that could melt glass. "We need to fix this. Now." She could barely breathe. Her career, her entire life, was about to go up in flames. And Cillian Murphy? Still unconscious, still blissfully unaware. For now. If you want to see how Naomi will survive this disaster, or if survival is even possible, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Things are about to spiral out of control. Cillian Murphy stared at Naomi, his expression unreadable. The room was so silent that Naomi could hear the steady beeping of the heart monitor. The weight of what had happened hung thick in the air, pressing down on her chest like a physical force. She had spent years handling difficult patients, diffusing tense situations, maintaining her composure under pressure. But this was a category of disaster she hadn't even known existed. Cillian exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. "Right. Let's go over this one more time, just so we're clear." His voice was dangerously calm. "I came in here for a minor procedure, yes?" Naomi nodded, gripping the clipboard in her hands as if it could anchor her. "That's correct. But instead of that," he continued, eyes narrowing, "I woke up to find out that you specifically, performed a vasectomy on me." She swallowed hard. "Yes, but—" He held up a hand. No, let me process." Silence. A long, unbearable silence. Then he let out a short laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh someone lets out when they've just been told something so absurd, so impossibly catastrophic, that their brain simply refuses to accept it. Naomi resisted the urge to check her own pulse. Whitmore stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Mr. Murphy, we take full responsibility for this." "Oh well, that's fantastic, isn't it?" Cillian's eyes flashed. "Because that will certainly bring back my—" He waved a hand vaguely towards his lower half. "My ability to father children, won't it?" Naomi jumped in quickly. "The procedure is reversible. The success rate is high." "Oh, high, is it?" Cillian shot her a look so sharp she nearly took a step back. "Oh, well, thank God. Because obviously I'd love to put my reproductive future in the same hands that got me into this mess in the first place." Her stomach twisted. "I understand how you must feel." "Oh, do you?" He let out another one of those borderline hysterical laughs. "Tell me, Dr. Carter, has anyone ever accidentally removed your ability to have children?" She clenched her jaw. "No." "Then you don't understand." Another long silence. Then, without breaking eye contact, he reached for his phone. Naomi's entire body tensed. The phone was already vibrating with messages. She could see the screen from where she stood. Tom Hardy, Peaky Blinders cast, multiple unknown numbers. Cillian scrolled, paused, then turned the screen towards her. She didn't want to look, but she did. Trending number 1, Sharp Murphy's vasectomy. Trending number 2, Peaky snipped. Trending number 3, Tom Hardy posts, ha ha ha. Her stomach dropped into her feet. Cillian clicked his phone off, exhaling sharply. Right then, he looked back at Naomi, eyes dark with something between amusement and rage. You are going to fix this. She nodded so fast her neck cracked. Absolutely. His gaze didn't waver. And you are going to ensure I don't end up as a goddamn punchline for the rest of my life. Naomi had no idea how she was going to do that, but she nodded anyway. If you want to see how Naomi is going to clean up this disaster, and whether Cillian Murphy will survive the media circus, subscribe to the channel. Things are only getting worse. Naomi sat in the hospital's break room, staring blankly at the untouched cup of tea in front of her. Her hands trembled slightly as she scrolled through her phone, absorbing the sheer scale of the disaster. Every major news outlet had picked up the story. Twitter was on fire. Memes were everywhere. She had expected backlash. She had expected outrage. What she hadn't expected was how quickly the world turned this into entertainment. Cillian Murphy in the role of a lifetime, a man who just wanted a checkup and lost his future. Breaking. Cillian Murphy and Tom Hardy no longer on speaking terms after unfortunate medical mishap. We live in a society where even Thomas Shelby can't escape the system. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Dr. Carter. A deep sigh on the other end. Then, I assume you've seen the internet? Naomi closed her eyes. Cillian Murphy. Of course. Yes, she said carefully. I've seen it. He exhaled sharply. Brilliant. Because now I have a very specific problem. And since you're the reason I have it, you're going to help fix it. She pinched the bridge of her nose. I already told you the procedure is reversible. This is bigger than the bloody procedure. His voice was clipped, controlled. I have a career that relies on my image, doctor. And right now my image is being dragged through hell. Naomi's stomach twisted. What do you want me to do? Silence. Then, the last thing she expected to hear. You and I are going to do an interview together. Her jaw nearly unhinged. What? I need to control the narrative, he said, his tone businesslike. Right now the world thinks I'm a joke. You're a walking scandal. So we go public. We get ahead of it. We tell them what really happened. She laughed, but it came out more like a choking noise. You want me to sit next to you on live television and admit that I sterilized you by accident? Yes, he said simply. Her mind raced. The logical part of her knew this was insane, but the realistic part knew that no hospital would touch her after this. If she wanted to save her career, she had to take drastic measures. She exhaled through her nose. Fine, but I need to be clear. I'm not going to be the villain in this. Doctor, Cillian said, his voice dry. Neither am I. Naomi wasn't sure if that was a promise or a warning. If you want to see how Naomi and Cillian handle their public interview and whether it will save them or destroy them, subscribe to the channel. This is about to get even messier. Naomi barely made it out of the room before she collapsed onto a chair in the hallway, her hands gripping her knees as she tried to process what had just happened. Cillian Murphy knew. Not only did he know, but he was handling it with a terrifying mix of calculated fury and deadpan sarcasm. She didn't know what was worse, the fact that she had quite literally sterilized an Oscar-winning actor, or the fact that the internet was having the time of its life with the situation. Dr. Whitmore loomed over her, his face still a dangerous shade of red. You, he seethed, are suspended until further notice. She looked up at him, still dazed. Suspended? You expected a bloody promotion? His voice dropped to a sharp whisper as he glanced at the door, making sure Cillian wasn't listening. Do you even understand what you've done? She gave a dry laugh. I believe I've been made painfully aware. Whitmore pinched the bridge of his nose. Go home, Carter. And for God's sake, don't talk to the press. Naomi opened her mouth to protest. But what was the point? Her career was already over. She trudged out of the hospital like a woman heading to her own funeral. Her phone vibrated so much in her pocket that she half considered throwing it into a storm drain. When she finally gave in and checked it, she immediately regretted it. Her face was everywhere. Who is Dr. Naomi Carter? Meet the woman who accidentally sterilized Cillian Murphy. Carter or Cutter, the surgeon who went too far. She groaned, rubbing her temples. This was beyond damage control. Then her phone rang. An unknown number. She stared at it, let it ring, and then, against her better judgment, answered. Dr. Carter. The voice was smooth, amused, and instantly recognizable. Her heart stopped. Mr. Murphy. You can call me Cillian, he said, voice maddeningly calm. We're far too entangled in each other's lives now for formalities, don't you think? She swallowed hard. Right. Well, if this is about— Oh, it is, he cut in, his tone sharp but oddly measured. Tell me, Dr. Carter, do you like documentaries? Naomi blinked. What? Cillian chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. I have a proposition for you. You and I are officially the biggest story on the planet, and we can either let the media devour us narns or we can control the narrative. Her breath caught in her throat. Oh, hell. She squeezed her eyes shut. You're suggesting we— What? Monetize this? I'm suggesting we make it into something useful, he replied smoothly. Meet me tomorrow. Let's discuss how we turn this catastrophe into an opportunity. Before she could respond, the line went dead. Naomi stared at her phone, feeling her soul leave her body. What had she just gotten herself into? If you want to see how Naomi handles Cillian Murphy's insane proposal and whether she can salvage her career, subscribe to the channel. This disaster is far from over. Naomi spent the entire night staring at her ceiling, wondering how her life had spiraled into a living PR nightmare, orchestrated by Cillian Murphy himself. The next morning, she arrived at the address he had texted her, a sleek, glass-walled office in central London. She was greeted by a woman with an expression so perfectly neutral that Naomi instantly suspected she was a lawyer. Mr. Murphy is expecting you, the woman said, leading her into a conference room. Cillian was already there, dressed in dark, casual clothes, sipping a coffee like he wasn't the most talked-about man on the internet. He glanced up as she entered, eyes assessing. Dr. Carter, he said smoothly. Sleep well? Naomi folded her arms. Like a baby. If babies had stress-induced insomnia and existential crises. His lips twitched. Excellent. Sit. She did. Her nerves wound so tight she could barely unclench her jaw. All right. What exactly are we doing here? Cillian set down his coffee. Damage control. Naomi let out a short laugh. Control? That ship has sailed, sunk, and been excavated for historical study. He ignored her. I have contacts, media specialists, the public will talk no matter what, but we get to decide what they talk about. She narrowed her eyes. And how exactly do we do that? Cillian leaned forward. We make a documentary. Naomi blinked. What? A real one, he clarified. We expose the flaws in the medical system, the understaffing, the errors the pressure doctors face. We shift the focus from celebrity horror story to systemic failure. She stared at him, stunned. That actually made sense. But, he continued, to sell it we need to own the scandal. We don't just address what happened, we control the conversation. Naomi hesitated. So I go from disgraced surgeon to medical whistleblower? Cillian tilted his head. You were getting destroyed anyway. Might as well burn the house down on your terms. A beat of silence. Then Naomi exhaled, rubbing her temples. This is insane. Cillian smirked. No, this is Hollywood. She looked at him, trying to read between the lines. And you? What do you get out of this? His smirk didn't waver. A redemption arc. A story that isn't about how I became an internet meme. Naomi drummed her fingers against the table. Every instinct told her not to trust this. But at this point, what did she have to lose? She straightened, meeting his gaze. Fine, but we do it my way. No sensationalism. No manipulating the facts. Cillian raised a brow. Deal. Naomi exhaled. She had just made a pact with the devil of media spin. If you want to see how Naomi and Cillian's documentary unfolds, and whether it saves or destroys them both, subscribe to the channel. The chaos is only beginning. Naomi sat in the dimly lit production office, staring at the script in front of her. A documentary. She still couldn't believe she had agreed to this. What had started as a nightmare was now morphing into something far more dangerous. A media game where the wrong move could end her for good. Across the room, Cillian was relaxed, flipping through a stack of notes like this was just another film roll. He glanced up at her, eyebrow raised. You look like you're about to bolt. She let out a slow breath. I just don't know if this is the right way to fix things. Naomi, he said, placing the papers down. The right way would have been not getting into this mess in the first place. Since we can't go back in time, we work with what we've got. She pinched the bridge of her nose. And what exactly do we have? A scandal, he said matter-of-factly, which means an audience. The director entered, looking harassed as he threw his bag onto the table. All right, let's get started. We need to nail the angle before this thing turns into an even bigger circus. Naomi sat up straighter. The angle should be the truth. The director snorted. The truth doesn't sell. A story does. She clenched her fists. This was exactly what she was afraid of. Cillian leaned back, watching the tension unfold like a spectator at a particularly amusing play. Let's compromise, he said. We tell the truth, but we frame it in a way that makes people care. Naomi folded her arms. And how do we do that without turning this into some over-dramatized sob story? The director smirked. We make you a hero. She blinked. Excuse me? Cillian nodded, amused. Think about it. Right now you're the doctor who botched Cillian Murphy's surgery. But what if you became the doctor exposing corruption in the medical system? Naomi stared at him. You want me to be some kind of martyr? Not a martyr, the director corrected. A survivor. She hesitated. This wasn't how she had imagined reclaiming her career. But was there really another option? If she didn't own the narrative, someone else would. Cillian studied her, then leaned forward. You have two choices. You fight back, or you let them bury you. The weight of it settled over her. The hospital had already tried to erase her. The media was waiting for her to crack. She exhaled slowly. Fine, but I'm doing this on my terms. Cillian grinned. That's the spirit. As the director started outlining the next steps, Naomi felt something shift inside her. If she was going down, she'd make damn sure she took the system with her. If you want to see how Naomi takes control of her own story, and whether this documentary will save her or ruin her completely, subscribe to the channel. The real fight is about to begin. Naomi arrived at the production office the next morning, feeling like she had stepped into a parallel universe where she was no longer a disgraced surgeon, but a character in some twisted media spectacle. The room was buzzing with energy. Cameras, lights, a dozen people moving with urgent purpose. A producer handed her a stack of papers. Dr. Carter, we've drafted some talking points for you. She skimmed through them, frowning. A victim of a broken system. The courage to speak out. A scandal that exposes the truth. She tossed the papers onto the table. This is scripted. I thought we were telling the truth. Cillian, leaning against a desk, barely looked up from his phone. We are. Just enhanced. Naomi crossed her arms. Enhanced? You mean spun. He finally met her gaze, his expression unreadable. You want to fix your reputation, don't you? She exhaled sharply. Not by turning myself into some martyr. The producer cleared his throat. The narrative is important, Dr. Carter. The public needs a clear story, one they can rally behind. Naomi clenched her jaw. She had spent her entire career fighting to be seen as competent. Now they wanted her to be pitiful? Cillian pushed away from the desk, pocketing his phone. Look, this isn't about painting you as a victim, it's about survival. Do you want to control your own fate, or do you want the media to keep running wild with their own version? She stared at him. The bastard was good at this. Finally, she grabbed the talking points and stuffed them into her bag. I'll say what I think is necessary, but I'm not playing into some sob story. Cillian smirked. Good, because neither am I. The first interview was a controlled setting. Soft lighting, serious tone, the kind of thing that made people lean in and believe. Naomi sat in the chair, microphone clipped to her blouse, trying to calm her racing heart. The interviewer smiled warmly. Dr. Carter, thank you for being here. Let's start from the beginning. What happened that night? Naomi inhaled. Here we go. She spoke clearly, honestly, recounting the events without embellishment. How the wrong file ended up in her hands. How she followed procedure, not knowing the patient was Cillian Murphy. The interviewer nodded sympathetically. And when did you realize? Naomi hesitated. The moment I saw his name trending online. The interviewer leaned forward. And how did that feel? She paused. She could say what the producers wanted, how she was devastated, how she felt powerless. Instead, she looked directly into the camera, like my entire career was reduced to a punchline. A beat of silence. Then somewhere in the background she swore she saw Cillian smirk. If you want to see how Naomi and Cillian navigate the media storm they've created, subscribe to the channel. The real game is just beginning. Naomi sat in the green room of the studio, her fingers clasped so tightly together that her knuckles had turned white. The overhead lights buzzed softly, the distant murmur of a production team preparing for the biggest interview of her life barely registering in her ears. Cillian sat across from her, impossibly calm, tapping his fingers against the arm of his chair. He had been through this before. Talk shows, press junkets, crisis control. But this wasn't just another media appearance for her. This was survival. "Relax, Dr. Carter," he said, not even looking up from his phone. "You look like you're about to be wheeled into surgery." She exhaled sharply. "That's because my entire career is about to be dissected live on air." He finally met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "So, make sure you're the one holding the scalpel." Before she could respond, a producer poked her head in. "You're up in 5. Naomi's stomach clenched as she followed Cillian to the stage. The bright lights hit her first, blinding, unforgiving. Then the audience, silent but watchful. Every seat was occupied. Journalists, industry professionals, people who had only turned up to see how bad the train wreck would be. The host, a sleek, well-practiced interviewer, smiled as they sat down. "Dr. Carter, Mr. Murphy, thank you for joining us tonight." Cillian gave his usual charming nod, while Naomi barely kept herself from shifting in her seat. She had to be careful. One wrong word and everything would implode. "So," the host continued, "the world has been rather fascinated by this story. A medical error of this magnitude, involving a celebrity of Mr. Murphy's status. It's unprecedented." "Many people wonder, Dr. Carter, how does someone make a mistake like that?" Naomi felt the room tighten around her. The trap had been laid. She could feel Cillian watching her, waiting. She took a slow breath. "Control the narrative. Hold the scalpel." "Mistakes happen in every profession," she said, voice steady. "In medicine, they're rare, but when they happen, the consequences are severe." "The real question isn't just how a mistake happens. It's why doctors are overworked, undersupported, and forced into conditions that make human error inevitable." Silence. Then a ripple of murmurs. She had turned the tables. The host leaned forward. "So you're saying this wasn't just your error?" Naomi met her gaze head on. "I take full responsibility for what happened, but if this incident has done anything, it's exposed how dangerous systemic failures can be. The truth is, I worked in a hospital where mistakes were covered up every day. Mine just happened to go public." Cillian smirked slightly. She was winning. The host turned to him. "Mr. Murphy, do you feel you've been fairly represented in all this?" He leaned back. "Well, I certainly didn't expect to wake up one day and become a meme," he said, prompting a chuckle from the audience. "But if this documentary helps expose a broken system rather than just focusing on my personal misfortune, then yes, I think it's worth it." Naomi exhaled quietly. She had survived the first strike, but she knew this wasn't over. If you want to see whether Naomi can keep control of the narrative or if everything comes crashing down, subscribe to the channel. The real battle is just beginning. Naomi left the studio feeling like she had just walked through fire. The interview had gone better than expected, but the battle wasn't over. Now it was a waiting game. Waiting to see how the public would react, waiting for the headlines to shift, waiting to find out if she had really managed to rewrite her own story. Cillian walked beside her, his hands in his pockets, looking infuriatingly unbothered. "Not bad, Dr. Carter. You didn't crumble under pressure." She shot him a look. "Were you hoping I would?" He smirked. "Let's just say I had backup plans." She didn't bother asking what that meant. With him, it could mean anything. Her phone vibrated with a flood of notifications. The internet had already reacted. Naomi Carter just turned the tables on the medical industry. Legendary. Cillian Murphy supporting a fallen doctor? Didn't have that on my 2024 bingo card. Wait, so she's not the villain? Maybe we jumped the gun. She exhaled, barely allowing herself to feel relief. "See?" Cillian said, glancing at her screen. "You're no longer the butcher of Hollywood, you're a whistleblower." She shook her head. "It's not that simple." "It never is," he said. "But perception is everything." Before she could respond, her phone rang. A number she didn't recognize. Hesitantly, she answered. "Dr. Carter speaking." A clipped, professional voice responded. "Dr. Carter, this is Elizabeth Shaw. Legal counsel for St. Augustine's Hospital. We need to discuss your recent statements. Immediately. Her stomach plummeted. Cillian, watching her reaction, tilted his head. Problem? She lowered the phone, staring at him. The hospital wants a word. He hummed, as if he'd been expecting this. Of course they do. You just exposed them on national television. Naomi rubbed her temples. She knew this would happen. She had forced their hand. Cillian's smirk widened. So, what's your next move? She swallowed, squared her shoulders, and dialed back. Dr. Carter, the lawyer said again, this time colder. I assume you understand the gravity of your statements. Naomi's grip on her phone tightened. I assume you understand that I have nothing left to lose. Silence. Then the lawyer exhaled sharply. We'd like to discuss a settlement. Cillian let out a low chuckle beside her. Ah, now they're scared. Naomi felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation creeping in. Not fear, not panic, control. She nodded to herself. I'll see you in your office. As she hung up, Cillian clapped her on the back. Welcome to the big leagues, Dr. Carter. She rolled her eyes but couldn't stop the small smile forming. For the first time since this nightmare began, she wasn't the one being cornered. If you want to see how Naomi handles the hospital's desperate offer, and whether she takes them down for good, subscribe to the channel. The fight is far from over. Naomi walked into the law firm's sleek office, her pulse steady but her mind sharp. This was it. The moment they either tried to silence her or finally owned up to their failures. She was led into a conference room, the kind designed to make people feel small, floor-to-ceiling windows, an impossibly long glass table, and a view that screamed power. Elizabeth Shaw sat at the head of the table, flanked by two other lawyers, both middle-aged men in sharp suits who looked like they thrived off intimidation. Naomi didn't flinch. Dr. Carter, Shaw began. Her voice clipped. Thank you for coming. I assume you understand why we requested this meeting? Naomi sat down, clasping her hands in front of her. I assume you understand that my patience is running thin. One of the lawyers, a man with graying hair and an air of overconfidence, slid a document across the table. We're prepared to offer a settlement, a generous one. Naomi glanced at the figure. It was a lot of money, enough to make her disappear quietly. She smirked. So that's the price of my silence? Shaw folded her hands neatly. The hospital has no interest in prolonging this any further. A public legal battle would be damaging. For everyone. Naomi leaned back. You mean for you? Because as I see it, your hospital has a long history of covering up negligence. You just never had someone willing to talk before. One of the lawyers cleared his throat. Dr. Carter, let's be pragmatic. You take the settlement, you move on, and this entire mess disappears. Isn't that what you want? Naomi tapped her fingers against the table, pretending to consider it. Then she smiled. I have a counteroffer. The room tensed. You don't just settle with me, she said. You launch a full internal review. Public, transparent. You acknowledge what's been happening and you fix it. One of the lawyers scoffed. That's not how this works. Naomi met Shaw's gaze. Then I walk out of here and take this fight to court. And trust me, you don't want that. Not after what I've learned. The air in the room shifted. She wasn't bluffing and they knew it. Shaw exhaled through her nose. Give us 24 hours. Naomi stood, pushing the untouched settlement offer back towards them. Take all the time you need. But if you try to bury this, I'll make sure it's the only thing people talk about. She walked out without looking back. For the first time, she had them on the defensive. Outside, Cillian was waiting, leaning against a car with an amused expression. Judging by your face, I assume negotiations went well? She exhaled, a slow, satisfied breath. Let's just say I didn't take the hush money. Cillian chuckled. You're starting to enjoy this, aren't you? She didn't answer, but deep down she knew he was right. If you want to see whether Naomi's gamble pays off or if the hospital fights back, subscribe to the channel. The final showdown is coming. Naomi sat in her flat, watching the city lights flicker through the window. 24 hours. That's how long the hospital had to decide whether they were going to take her offer or go to war. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Check the news. Her heart lurched as she opened a link. Breaking. St. Augustine's announces independent investigation following controversy. She blinked, read it again, then again. They'd folded. Her phone rang almost immediately. Elizabeth Shaw's name flashed on the screen. Naomi answered, keeping her voice steady. I assume this is about your hospital's sudden burst of conscience? A slow sigh. Don't be smug, Dr. Carter. You forced our hand. Naomi let a small smile creep in. That was the idea. Shaw hesitated. The board has agreed to a full review. The media will get their spectacle and you've won. Naomi's grip tightened on the phone. She'd done it. Shaw's voice softened slightly. For what it's worth, you were right, and I hope you do something good with this. The line went dead. Naomi exhaled, closing her eyes. It was over. A knock at the door. She opened it to find Cillian Murphy standing there, holding 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey. Thought you might need this, he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. She smirked. Is this your way of admitting I outplayed you? He poured the drinks. Let's just say I appreciate a good performance. Naomi took a sip, letting the warmth spread through her. So, what happens now? You return to being a Hollywood icon, and I try to rebuild my career? Cillian tilted his head. You could do more than rebuild, you know. This story's bigger than just you. You're the woman who took on the system, and won. She let that sink in. She had spent her life fighting to be seen. Now, people were finally listening. A notification popped up on her phone. Her inbox flooded with interview requests. Medical journals wanting to publish her perspective. Organizations reaching out. She had a platform now. A voice. Cillian raised his glass. To your new career, whatever that may be. Naomi clinked her glass against his. To writing my own story. As she looked out over the city, she realized something. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving. She was in control. If you've followed Naomi's journey and want more incredible stories like this, subscribe to the channel. This may be the end of one chapter, but who knows what comes next. Stay tuned.